The clink of crystal against crystal, a sound usually reserved for celebrations, felt like a death knell. But my hand, a veteran of countless mundane tasks and a few not-so-mundane ones, moved with a speed that belied the tremor of barely restrained rage pulsing through me. They raised their champagne flutes, those gleaming, fragile vessels of bubbly poison, a toast to what? Their shared delusion? Their twisted, little game of betrayal? I could practically taste the deceit, thick and cloying like cheap perfume. Caleb, my brother, the man whose hand I'd held when he'd skinned his knee on the asphalt, the one who'd borrowed my car and returned it with an empty tank and a sheepish grin, stood there, his eyes locked on Eleanor's. Eleanor, my wife, the woman whose laughter once sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze, now a discordant symphony of lies. They'd perfected the art of subtle communication, those microscopic shifts in expression, the barely perceptible nods, the way their eyes lingered just a fraction too long. They thought I was blind. They thought I was a fool. But I'd been watching. I'd been listening. And I'd been preparing. The dinner party, a facade of normalcy, a charade designed to lull me into a false sense of security, was about to become a stage for their own undoing. The glasses, those twin beacons of treachery, stood side by side on the polished mahogany table. A simple switch. A silent, decisive act. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage that had been building for months. It was a rage that felt as familiar as an old, worn leather jacket, a rage I'd learned to control, to channel, to weaponize. The glasses were swapped, a blur of practiced precision, a sleight of hand honed from years of, well, let's just say I've learned a few things in my time. The champagne, that effervescent symbol of celebration, now held a different kind of promise. A promise of reckoning. 30 minutes later, the air crackled with a sudden, violent shift. Caleb convulsed, his face contorted in a mask of agony that was both grotesque and disturbingly satisfying. His eyes, once filled with a smug self-assurance, now bulged with terror. His body thrashed against the expensive Persian rug, a chaotic dance of pain. Eleanor screamed, a high-pitched, theatrical sound that grated on my nerves like fingernails on chalkboard. She clutched at Caleb, her manicured nails digging into his arm, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "What's happening?" she shrieked, her voice laced with a tremor that didn't quite ring true. The other guests, a collection of wealthy, oblivious socialites, gasped and recoiled, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The dinner party, meant to celebrate something, their new business venture, perhaps, dissolved into chaos. A symphony of panicked voices, the clatter of dropped silverware, the sickening thud of Caleb's body hitting the floor. I watched, a detached observer, as the scene unfolded, a tableau of their own making. Was it the food? A sudden illness? A stroke? No one knew, but I did, and that knowledge burned, a cold fire in my gut, a stark contrast to the icy calm that settled over me, a strange sense of peace, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Eleanor's eyes, those calculating, deceptive eyes, flickered towards me, a fleeting moment of naked fear before she masked it with a practiced expression of concern. She knew. She had to know. But what would she do? What would she say? How would she explain this? And more importantly, how would she explain what she and my brother had attempted to do to me? The questions hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the scent of impending rain. What secrets were about to be revealed? The ambulance sirens wailed, a mournful symphony against the backdrop of the quiet suburban night. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to, a grim echo of my past life. You see, before all this domestic drama, I was an army medic. Years spent patching up soldiers in the dust and heat of some godforsaken desert had a way of desensitizing you to the sight of blood and panic. But this was different. This was personal. Eleanor rode with Caleb, her hand clasped tightly in his, playing the role of the distraught wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was good, I'll give her that. An Oscar-worthy performance. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. I followed in my own car, the flashing lights reflecting in my rearview mirror, a macabre dance of red and blue. It was surreal, like something out of a movie. Except this was my life. My twisted, messed up life. The hospital waiting room was a sterile, fluorescent-lit purgatory. The air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the occasional cough or sniffle. A tired-looking Christmas tree stood in the corner, its tinsel drooping like a forgotten dream. It was almost comical, this juxtaposition of holiday cheer and impending doom. Doctors rushed in and out, their faces grim, their voices hushed. Every time a door opened, my stomach clenched, a knot of anticipation and dread. Was this it? Was this the moment I'd become a widower? Or would he pull through, only to face the consequences of his actions? Eleanor paced, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the frantic beat of my own heart. She kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. She was like a cornered animal, desperate, but still dangerous. But she didn't say a word. Not yet. The silence was a weapon, a tool of manipulation. She was waiting, gauging my reaction, trying to decipher what I knew. But I wasn't giving her anything. I maintained a stoic facade, my face a mask of concern. I was playing the long game now. I wanted to see how far she would go, how deep her deception ran. What would the doctors find? Would they be able to identify the poison? Would they suspect foul play? Or would this all be brushed aside as a tragic accident? The questions swirled in my mind, a vortex of uncertainty and anticipation. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. The arrival of the police was like a splash of cold water, a stark reminder of the reality of the situation. Detective Miller, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that could cut through steel, took charge of the scene. She had the air of someone who'd seen it all, someone who wouldn't be easily fooled. Her questions were sharp, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. She focused on the details, the minutiae of the evening, piecing together the timeline of events. "What did your brother eat tonight?" she asked, her gaze fixed on me. "Everything we all did," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Eleanor's a fantastic cook." I even managed a small, sad smile. See, years of playing poker with my old man had taught me a thing or two about keeping a straight face. "Anything unusual?" she pressed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Just the champagne," I said, my voice carefully neutral. It was a new brand. Eleanor picked it up from some fancy wine shop. I could feel Eleanor's eyes on me, burning into my skin. But I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze fixed on Detective Miller, playing the role of the concerned, cooperative brother-in-law. Eleanor's eyes flickered, a momentary lapse in her carefully constructed facade. It was just a flicker, a fleeting micro-expression, but I caught it. She knew. She knew that the champagne was the source of Caleb's illness. But she couldn't say anything, not without incriminating herself. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Detective Miller observed us both, her expression unreadable. She was like a predator, patiently waiting for her prey to make a mistake. And Eleanor, despite her composure, was starting to crack. The strain of maintaining her charade was taking its toll. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands. Why would she risk everything for him? What hold did Caleb have over her? Was it love? Lust? Or was something more sinister? The questions gnawed at me, fueling the fire in my belly. I needed answers. I needed to understand the depths of their betrayal. But for now, I had to play the game. I had to maintain my innocence, my ignorance. I had to wait for the right moment to strike. The wheels were in motion. The game had begun, and I was determined to win. What would the police uncover? Would Eleanor's carefully crafted mask slip? And what dark secrets would be revealed in the process? Back at the house, the scene felt like a crime scene, which in a way it was. The police had cordoned off the dining room, their yellow tape a stark contrast to the warm, inviting ambience we'd tried to create. I stood in the living room, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, a constant, low drone that seemed to amplify the tension. The memory of the stolen glances, the hushed whispers, the late-night phone calls flooded back, each one a sharp, painful reminder of their deception. I had suspected something for months, a nagging feeling that something was amiss. But I dismissed it, convincing myself I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. How foolish I was. Eleanor, with her polished charm and calculated smiles, had always been a master of deception. She could weave a web of lies so intricate, so convincing, that even I, her husband, had fallen prey to her illusions. Caleb, my own brother, had fallen under her spell, blinded by what? Lust? Greed? A twisted sense of loyalty? I couldn't fathom it. They had underestimated me. They thought I was oblivious, a naive fool who wouldn't notice the subtle signs of their betrayal. But I had seen the signs, the little inconsistencies, the moments when their carefully constructed facade slipped. And I had prepared. I had started paying closer attention, listening to their conversations, observing their interactions. I began to understand that the best way to uncover a secret is to act as if you know nothing, to blend in, to observe, to wait for the opportune moment. Like a predator stalking its prey. How long had this been going on? Had their affair started months ago? Years? The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. The idea of them betraying me for so long felt like a physical blow. I felt the need to inspect the office. The office, usually a space I avoided, felt like a battleground. I rifled through drawers, searched hidden compartments, scanned through emails and deleted messages. I found hidden emails, deleted messages, and a small, unlabeled vial tucked away in a drawer. The emails detailed their plan, a slow, methodical poisoning designed to mimic a natural illness. The vial contained a substance, a clear liquid with a faint, metallic scent. My blood ran cold. They had planned to eliminate me, to slowly poison me, to watch me wither away, all while playing the role of the devoted wife and concerned brother. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They had intended to make it look like a natural death, a tragic illness. No suspicion, no investigation. Just a quiet, unnoticed demise. I felt a surge of rage, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me. But beneath the rage, there was a cold, calculating resolve. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them get away with it. I would expose their treachery, no matter the cost. Who else had they practiced on? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Were there other victims? Other unsuspecting people who had fallen prey to their twisted schemes? I needed to know. I needed to uncover the full extent of their crimes. I carefully photographed the vial and the emails, documenting every piece of evidence. I knew I couldn't confront them directly yet. I needed to gather more information, to build a case that would leave no room for doubt. I confronted Eleanor the next day, her eyes widening as I presented the evidence. I chose a neutral setting, a quiet cafe near the hospital. I wanted to see her reaction, to gauge her level of deception. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous, sliding the photographs across the table. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice hardening. "I know everything." She scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "You're imagining things, Arthur," she said, using my name with a venomous sweetness. "You're delusional." But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered with fear, with a desperate attempt to maintain her composure. She knew she was caught. "These emails detail a plan to poison someone," I said, pointing to the photographs. "And this vial contains the substance. Care to explain?" She remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was like a cornered animal, defiant but terrified. "Who were you trying to protect?" I asked. "Caleb? Yourself?" She still said nothing. "Or was it both of you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. She finally broke, her eyes filling with tears. I can't talk about it," she stammered. "Why not?" I pressed. "What are you so afraid of?" She looked around the cafe, her eyes darting from face to face. She was trapped, caught in her own web of lies. Who was she protecting? What dark secrets was she hiding? And how far would she go to keep them buried? The realization that I needed to switch the glasses hadn't been a sudden epiphany, a stroke of genius in the face of danger. It had been a gradual dawning, a creeping suspicion that had solidified into a cold, hard certainty. It started with the little things. A misplaced phone, a hushed conversation quickly terminated when I entered the room, a lingering scent of an unfamiliar perfume on Caleb's clothes. At first, I dismissed them as mere coincidences, the product of an overactive imagination. But the signs, like insidious weeds, kept growing, multiplying, choking the life out of my trust. There was the time I found a receipt for an expensive piece of jewelry, a diamond bracelet, tucked away in Eleanor's purse. When I confronted her about it, she claimed it was a gift for her mother. But her mother, bless her soul, had been allergic to anything flashier than a simple pearl earring. Then there were the late-night phone calls, the whispered conversations behind closed doors. I'd catch snippets of their conversations, veiled references to the plan, to taking care of things, to a future without obstacles. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between Eleanor and Caleb in the garden. They were discussing a business venture, a new investment opportunity that promised a significant return. But their voices were laced with a strange tension, a veiled excitement that didn't quite match the mundane topic of conversation. That's when the chilling realization hit me. They weren't talking about business. They were talking about me. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The misplaced phone, the expensive jewelry, the late-night calls, the hushed conversations. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. They were planning to get rid of me. And that's when the idea of switching the glasses took root. It wasn't a heroic act, a selfless sacrifice. It was a calculated move, a desperate gamble to protect myself. I knew the risks, the potential consequences, but I also knew that doing nothing was not an option. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I began to observe them more closely, like a scientist studying a particularly dangerous species. I noticed the way they looked at each other, the subtle touches, the shared glances that spoke volumes. I listened to their conversations, deciphering their coded language, piecing together their twisted plan. I discovered that they had been meeting in secret, planning their moves, meticulously crafting their scheme. They had even gone so far as to consult with a lawyer, discussing ways to ensure that their actions would go unpunished. The more I learned, the more determined I became to expose them. I wouldn't let them get away with it. I wouldn't let them destroy my life. I would fight back, even if it meant risking everything. Eleanor's silence was deafening. She sat there, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling in her lap. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for so long was crumbling before my eyes. Who were you trying to protect? I repeated, my voice softer now, almost pleading. Caleb? Yourself. She finally looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. I can't tell you, she whispered. Why not? I pressed. What are you so afraid of? She hesitated, her gaze darting around the cafe, as if searching for an escape route. They'll hurt me, she stammered. Ooh, I demanded. Who will hurt you? She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. I can't say, she whispered. Please, just let it go. But I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I had discovered. Eleanor, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I need you to trust me. Tell me what's going on. Who are you so afraid of? She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. I could see the fear in them, but also a flicker of something else. Hope? Desperation? I couldn't tell. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, I said, my voice filled with conviction. You have to. For both of us. She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. It's not just Caleb, she said, her voice barely audible. There's someone else. Eleanor's silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations around us. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with a strange mix of defiance and despair. It's my father, she whispered, the words barely audible above the cafe's gentle hum. My mind reeled. Her father? What possible motive could he have for wanting me dead? He'd always been charming, a little overbearing perhaps, but always welcoming. He treated me like a son, or so I thought. Your father? I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. What? Eleanor took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as if a tremendous weight had settled upon them. He promised me $1 million, she confessed, her voice cracking, to start my own business. He said I was wasting my potential with you, that Caleb was the more successful son, the one with a brighter future. $1 million. And my own brother. The betrayal cut deep, a jagged wound in my heart. And you agree? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. He made it seem so easy, like a clean break, a fresh start. She described how her father had orchestrated the whole thing, how he'd manipulated her, played on her insecurities and ambitions. He'd painted a picture of a life of luxury and independence, a life free from the constraints of our marriage. And Caleb? I asked, my voice tight with anger. He was hesitant at first, Eleanor admitted, but my father convinced him. He promised him a partnership in the company, a chance to expand his own business. So that was it. Greed and ambition, the oldest motives in the book. My own wife and brother, blinded by the allure of wealth and power, had conspired to eliminate me. But there was something else in Eleanor's eyes, something beyond the guilt and fear. It was a flicker of love. We fell in love, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb and I, it wasn't just about the money. We found something real, something we never had before. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had found solace in each other's arms, a love that I, apparently, had failed to provide. But their love was forbidden, a threat to their carefully constructed facade. Her father, a man obsessed with appearances and reputation, wouldn't allow it. He said it would ruin us, Eleanor explained, her voice trembling. Our families, our businesses. He said we needed to find a way to be together, a way that wouldn't cause a scandal. And that's when the plan to poison me had taken shape, a desperate attempt to secure their future together. The weight of Eleanor's confession settled on me like a lead blanket. My own wife, the woman I loved, had not only betrayed me, but had also fallen in love with my own brother. And her father, the man I'd respected, had orchestrated the whole thing. The rage that had been simmering within me now erupted, a volcanic explosion of fury and betrayal. I wanted to lash out, to hurt them, to make them pay for what they had done. But as the initial shock subsided, a colder, more calculating emotion took hold. Revenge. It wouldn't bring back the trust I'd lost or the love I'd once believed in, but it would give me a sense of justice, a way to reclaim my power. I looked at Eleanor, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. She was a victim too, in a way, manipulated by her father's greed and her own desires. But that didn't excuse her actions. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. I need some time to think, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I got up and left the cafe, leaving Eleanor sitting there, alone with her guilt and her fear. I walked aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. My mind raced, trying to process the events of the past few days. The betrayal, the attempted act, the twisted web of lies and deceit. But amidst the chaos, a plan began to form, a plan for revenge. It wouldn't be easy, and it would certainly be risky, but it was the only way I could see to move forward. I would use their own weapons against them. I would play their game, but I would play it better. I would expose their treachery, ruin their reputations, and destroy their dreams. I would start with Eleanor's father. He was the mastermind behind this whole scheme, the one who had manipulated everyone for his own gain. I would find a way to discredit him, to expose his corruption, to bring him down from his pedestal of power. And then I would deal with Eleanor and Caleb. They would pay for their betrayal, for the pain they had caused me. But my revenge wouldn't be violent or destructive. It would be cold, calculated, and utterly devastating. I started by digging into Eleanor's father's business dealings. I knew he had a reputation for being ruthless, for cutting corners, for exploiting loopholes. It wasn't hard to find evidence of his shady practices. I uncovered a trail of fraudulent transactions, hidden accounts, and illegal activities. I contacted a journalist, a friend, who specialized in investigative reporting. I provided him with the information I had gathered, along with the evidence of the poisoning plot. He was intrigued, to say the least. The story broke a few weeks later, a bombshell expose that sent shockwaves through the city. Eleanor's father's reputation was shattered, his business empire crumbling under the weight of the scandal. He was arrested, charged with fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to commit crime. The news spread like wildfire, a delicious irony that the man who had tried to destroy me was now facing his own downfall. But this was just the beginning. I had a long way to go and many more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness. What would Eleanor and Caleb do now that her father had been exposed? How would they react to my revenge? And what would be the final outcome of this twisted game? The immediate aftermath of Eleanor's father's arrest was a whirlwind. Caleb, despite his initial anger, found himself in a state of stunned disbelief. The man he'd seen as a potential father-in-law, a symbol of success and stability, was now a disgraced criminal. The reality of the situation began to settle in, and a chilling realization dawned on him. He'd been played. Eleanor, meanwhile, was a ghost of her former self. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated, ambitious woman had crumbled, revealing a fragile, deeply wounded individual. The betrayal by her own father, the man she'd always trusted, had shattered her sense of security and left her adrift in a sea of guilt and regret. I observed them both, noting the subtle shifts in their behavior. Caleb's anger was slowly morphing into a cold, calculating resolve. Eleanor's despair was giving way to a quiet determination. I knew that the seeds of doubt I'd planted were taking root, and that they were both beginning to see the truth. I decided to confront Caleb, not with accusations, but with a carefully crafted appeal to his sense of brotherhood. "Caleb," I began, my voice calm and steady, "we've both been betrayed. He used you, just like he used Eleanor, just like he tried to use me." I presented him with the evidence I'd gathered, the emails, the financial records, the testimonies of those who had been wronged by Eleanor's father. I showed him how he'd been manipulated, how his ambition had been exploited. "We're brothers, Caleb," I continued. "We need to stand together. We need to expose him for what he is." Caleb listened, his expression a mixture of anger, disbelief, and dawning realization. The truth was sinking in, and the anger he'd initially directed at me was now shifting towards the man who had orchestrated this whole twisted game. A tentative alliance began to form between Caleb and me. We started to talk, to share our experiences, to piece together the puzzle of Eleanor's father's schemes. We discovered a pattern of manipulation, a history of exploiting people's weaknesses for his own gain. We also started to see Eleanor in a new light. Her initial desire for wealth and status had been twisted and exploited by her father, who had used her ambition as a tool to further his own agenda. Eleanor, witnessing the growing bond between Caleb and me, began to question her own role in the events. She realized that she had been complicit in her father's crimes, that she had allowed her ambition to blind her to the consequences of her actions. She approached us, her eyes filled with remorse. "I want to help," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to make amends." We were skeptical at first, but her sincerity was evident. She provided us with crucial information, details about her father's financial dealings, his hidden accounts, his network of corrupt associates. With the combined efforts of Caleb, Eleanor, and myself, we were able to build an airtight case against Eleanor's father. The evidence was overwhelming, and the authorities had no choice but to act. He was arrested, charged with fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to commit that crime. The news sent shockwaves through the city, and a once respected businessman was now a pariah. In the aftermath, Caleb and I began to rebuild our relationship, the scars of betrayal slowly healing. Eleanor, seeking redemption, dedicated herself to helping others who had been victims of similar manipulation. Of course, My relationship with Eleanor was irrevocably broken. There was no going back, no possibility of reconciliation. The trust had been shattered, and the pain of her betrayal was too deep to ignore. We parted ways, the divorce proceedings swift and decisive. The experience had changed me. It had opened my eyes to the dark side of human nature, the destructive power of greed and ambition. But it had also taught me the importance of forgiveness, the power of compassion, and the resilience of the human spirit. I had faced my demons, confronted my betrayers, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to live a life of integrity. And now, as I sat at the small table in the cozy bistro, a warm smile spread across my face. Across from me sat Sarah, a woman whose laughter was genuine, whose eyes sparkled with intelligence, and whose presence filled the room with a sense of warmth and possibility. We had met a few months prior, a chance encounter at a local bookstore, and our connection had been immediate and effortless. Tonight was our first official date, and I found myself feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't felt in years. The past was behind me, a chapter closed, a lesson learned. I was ready to embrace the future, to open my heart to new possibilities, to find happiness again. The champagne flutes on the table shimmered, not with poison, but with the promise of a fresh start. And this time, I knew it would be different.